Hello, hello, everyone. I hope you had a chance to have some lunch, maybe enjoy the sunshine. I've heard that there is a sun out there. I haven't seen it myself yet, but maybe before the end of the day. Welcome back to the afternoon of Next Level. We have another great session here, starting out with Younes Rabi. They will be talking about live game design. And Younes, how are you feeling? You good to go? I shall hand over.
Yeah.
All right, take it away. Thanks very much.
Well, I said yes. I mean, no. I need a glass of water first.
That's okay.
This thing can do asymmetrical, right?
Since we've had a few people asking, these talks are going to be recorded, and we'll make them live online as soon as we can afterwards. So if you missed a slide, don't worry. You'll be able to come and get them later. All right, thanks so much, Younes. Take it away.
Yes, sure. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me well? Is it coming through? Yes? Cool, perfect. So hi, thanks for coming to my talk, named Changing the Rules, How AI Can Redesign Games While We Play Them. So my name is Younes Rabi. I'm an indie game developer, and I've been doing games for about 10 years under the pseudonym Pyrofox. I'm a game AI researcher. I've been there for a few years now, and I'm a member of the Knives and Pen Brushes Collective, which is a collective of researchers who want to use AI to change how people design games and the kind of games it's possible to design. And today, I'm going to speak very much about my work in hopefully enabling new form of games to exist. The way I want to do this is to show you the rationale, the idea, like to give you an instinct about the missed opportunity that I'm seeing. And the best way to do this would be possibly to make analogy with another medium that has more history that we know a little bit better. And in this case, I'm going to use music. I'm going to make parallels between music and video games. In the way we interact with them and in their content a little bit. So yeah, games and music are more similar than they appear. We have classics. We have games like chess or Western classical music that we consider in our Western culture to be classics that everyone should know about, that are the epitome, the best games or the best music that somebody could hope to master one day. And we have, of course, more modern genres that are a bit less palatable for my parents, like doom metal or Doom 2016, the video game. And we have, in both music and video games, genres or artists influencing each other, creating new subgenres, creating new scenes that are very hard to explain or to analyze with more modern lenses. Like, how do you explain to your parents what's the lofi hip-hop girl, like, and how it became such a cultural symbol, for example. And I'm interested here not exactly in the content or the specific genres of these games, but more about the way we interact with them. And in our analogy here, when we think about the way we play video games, the equivalent in music would possibly be interacting with recordings. When you think about it, they are very similar, or the way video games traditionally were. You used to have like a digital recording that you put into a machine that plays the recording for you, and then you can interact with it, meaning either dancing or playing Super Mario, for instance. And in some ways, you can see it as this recording, it's static. You can't really change it. You can interact with it, but you can't change the software that is inside, meaning that the design of the game you're playing can't change. It is static. You are at the end of a sort of chain of production where a studio has released a record or a video game that is fixed and you're playing that instance. Of course, nowadays we can have updates and patches, but that's still like the most traditional way people interact with video games. And even those updates and patches, they come late. They need to go through a whole development cycle before coming back to you. And in some ways, the digital recording, it's a record of a performance that has already happened and you're not there. When you're listening to Bohemian Rhapsody, you are not in the room with Freddie Mercury. It has been recorded once and you're playing the recording. It's the same for video games. You're not in the studio while the game is doing design. You are at the end of that process. And that's the case for video games, most video games. But I'm speaking about games in general. And of course, there are games that are very different from this. I'm thinking of role-playing games. That's like a umbrella term for tabletop RPGs, alternate reality games, and LARPing. These games are very different from the way we interact with video games traditionally. They would be closer to attending a live performance, to being there in the room with the performers, and sometimes being allowed to interact with them too. These are games that have two interesting properties that I think are crucial. They are reactive and creative. Reactive in this case means having the ability to adapt the narrative and the gameplay right now. Not after updates or patches, but at the instant you play them, there's a DM, a game master, that knows what you're doing, that sometimes create content like, hey, you're trying to go inside that room that had nothing inside before, now there's something, and here's what you find in it. That's the case for narrative, that's for gameplay too. Sometimes they create rules, they refer to a book, of course, but they have sometimes to create new rules on the spot. There are also games that are creative in the way that they are, players are not just people that can experience something that has been created, they can also create too. They are involved in the act of saying part of a story or designing parts of the rules that are going to exist in that game. They are involved in creating narrative and gameplay. They are creative in some ways. And if you look at it through that lens, a GM is not that much different from being a DJ. First, because it has two letters in the same acronym. I think we should give him a PhD just for that, by the way. And they also like have this kind of interaction with the audience where they do a mix of improvising and having pre-designed content. A DJ has a list of records they can pull at any time, and but they also have their own mixes or play with it, tweak it. And they do it this way to adapt to the audience's own tempo. Like if you see people bopping to something, like, okay, you want more of this, or they can ask for specific songs to be played. And GMs do that too. They have this negotiation all the time between what people want to see and what you want to make them subject to. But this lens, this parallel, for now really only exists in role-playing games. It doesn't exist yet in video games. It's not that much widespread. And there are examples of video games that stray from this paradigm of you playing something fixed, that are closer to attending a live performance. There's two of them I'd like to speak about today that will highlight why I think these games are super interesting. They are named Blazeball and Neurocracy. You might have heard of some of them. I'm going to pitch them. I'm going to explain Blazeball, but first you need to know that I swear to you, the only psychotrope I took today were tea and sugar. Blazeball is a kind of simulation game where you see fictional players playing a fictional sport named Blazeball. It looks a lot like baseball, but it's way more absurd and horrific in the sense that a lot of weird things can happen inside the game. Like players in Blazeball, like the fictional players that are simulated, can grow fingers to catch the ball better. They can suck the blood of each other to steal the vibes from the other. That's an actual thing that can happen. You can see cosmic horrors coming on the field to create a new weather condition, things like that. The way you play the game is you choose your favorite team. For instance, the Hades Tigers, that are not there, but are the best team objectively. You choose the Hades Tigers, you bet on their victories or their losses, and then you use the tickets you win for these bets to make decisions in the game, like community decisions. Like everybody would decide to vote for, oh, we want to open the Forbidden Book. Even though you don't know what's in the Forbidden Book, you want to open it, and that's a choice the developers allow. Developers give choices that will impact the whole game for everyone at the same time. It's a game that has a lot of fan art. This is not exactly fan art, like it's a spin-off, but fan art would look like this. People have favorite players, but there are only names and a few statistics and a few matches that have played, and they would create stories and arts around it. And Blazeball, the developers would embrace that story and make it like the story that is going inside the game. Like, yes, this is what's going, and that's too. The other game I will talk about is called Neurocracy. So Neurocracy is different in genre. It's a game set in the near future, in 2049. Your initial goal is that you are invited to solve a murder happening in the near future. but the only tool you have to solve this murder or to interact with this world is access to Wikipedia of the future. So you would like read articles on what is the world like in 2049, but, like technology-wise, society-wise, climate change-wise. And the game would release new articles each week between episodes, and you would like see how the articles would have been edited, for instance, by some party that says, oh, I don't want this information to be public, so I'm going to retract it. Or I want people to think this instead, for instance. And in between episodes, in between releases, players would write theories in the Discord or forums, and the game masters would read these theories and sometimes adapt the continuation of the game, of the story, based on what the players are thinking about. Those are examples of what players can do when they get together. They create huge conspiracy boards, like in these detective movies where they pin stuff together, like, oh, but there's this happening at the same time. Is that a coincidence? Things like that. That's the way people would somehow play Wikipedia, like by putting up like huge conspiracy boards and making theories about it. These games are very interesting to me for multiple reasons that I attribute to having something that I call a yes and attitude. Yes and is a motto in improvisation theater, where the goal is when we have someone doing something, doing a bit, and you want to improvise with them, if they do something you don't really like, you don't say no to this. You say yes and. You accept what they did, and then you do something else that goes in the direction that you want to go after, but you embrace it. And this idea of embracing things is very much at the core of these games. For examples, these games embrace the weirdness and weave it back into the game itself. And when I speak about weirdness, I speak about everything, like the bugs in the simulations, or the things that programmers created but did not intend to. For instance, in Blazeball, you would have fictional players, who would be able to change team between sessions, but also inside matches. So at some point, there's like a player who batted the ball, who swapped a team and tried to catch their own ball. And they're like, yeah, it's not a bug. That's like, it's possible in the game. That's part of the experiences of Blazeball. There's also games where they let players fill in the blanks of these games in the narrative. In Blazeball, like the fan stories, but in Neurocracy, there's a fan theories, where people would write theories about the game, like, hey, I think this character is able to read minds, but I'm not sure. Here's why I think that. And sometimes you would have the game masters, that's not an actual example, but sometimes you have a game master being like, interesting idea. I'm going to write a fictional movie that has this exact same synopsis inside Neurocracy. So you would know that this thing is possible, but also that everybody thinks it's absurd. That thing happened to me. I'm still mad about it. Like, I wrote a whole theory, and then it became the synopsis of a movie inside the world. I'm like, am I going crazy? Is that something that's possible? Something too sci-fi? I don't know. But it feels like the game is reacting to what I say, to what I think, and it lets me, and the game sometimes allow things to be true. Like, we have neuroscientists playing Neurocracy, having ideas about the way technology works, and having the developers saying, like, yes, this is smart, actually. This should be the actual way this is work. And they weave it into the game itself. There's also games where the game masters don't punish players when they do weird things, but instead they play playfully. For instance, in Blazeball, you have a currency named peanuts that you could buy, and somebody found a way to have infinite peanuts. And instead of like punishing this player who has found a hack, they decided to build on it and bring the peanut god from the sky, coming to punish everyone and to start trapping players into peanut shells to make them feel their wrath. This is the kind of attitude. Oh, we had pictures about this. This is the peanut god, fan interpretation. So yeah, these are examples where they let players and the community put things into the game and feed it back into the story itself. These are fascinating, and when I look more into these kind of free examples, these are free examples of expectations being subverted, but by different parties. When you embrace the bugs and the simulation weirdness, you're letting the system surprise you. When you let players fill the blanks in the story, you're letting the audience surprise you. And when the game masters don't adhere to some kind of strict rules, but instead playfully interact with players, That's the way game masters can subvert the expectations they have on them as the people who are enforcing the rules. They can also decide not to respect them and to punish you specifically in a weird way, but a fun way. And that's, to take another parallel, in physics we have a problem named the free bodies problem, where you have like 3 planets orbiting around each other. That situation is known in physics to be very hard to predict. It's very hard to know how the systems, how the planets are going to go. Are they going to crash? Are they going to do a cold trajectory? And here I see a way to speak about this kind of live performance games as a kind of dance between these 3 bodies, the system, the audience, and the game masters, in the sense that everybody interacts with each other, but also nobody can anticipate where the game is going, and that's part of the fun of the experience of playing these games. That's not the only common point between Blaze Ball and Anarocracy. Sadly, there's another one. It's that both teams, when they worked on these games, were exhausted. They kind of fall into a pattern where they were crunching, because at the same time they were like catering to an audience, but also building a whole video game that crashes all the time, and instead of like having the time to fix it and then give it to you, they had to fix it while we were playing it, which is very stressful. And same thing for Anarocracy developers. Parts of a story were written while the game was running, reacting to what player did and thought about, of course. But also, like, just they had to sit down and write in between weeks. And if you're a writer, you know how that scary sounds. It's a bit unhinged, to be honest. It's a huge toll put on them. It's a lot of effort and energy and pain. And I want to crank it up. Not the pain. I want to support these developers. I love these games. I want to see more of them. I think they could do very interesting things. They could tell very interesting stories, have a very interesting gameplay. But these are hard limits that people have a hard time making them. And what I want to crank up here is one of the actor. I want to put more energy into the system itself. I want to make it smarter. I want to make it more powerful. I want to be able to make it able to support the other actors, which are the players and the developers. If we take the DJ analogy, I want to make smarter synthesizer, basically. That's my goal. The direction why I'm going to do this, the impacts I hope this will have, is first to offload some of the weight that are on one party, specifically the developers, and to put it elsewhere. Except it can't work. Like we know it's a bit of a lie. There's a whole field that came before us that is named procedure generation, where for a long time they sold this myth that, hey, if you use my map generator, you will not have to make maps anymore, so you have more time in your day. This is not how it works. For multiple reasons. There's social reasons where if you have more time in front of you, you will just have time to do other stuff, and you will be still working, but on something else. But also, this system doesn't come from nowhere. Energy that is not spent doing something manually might be spent building the system to do it. So there's like a trade-off here. And this kind of trade-off is not just abstract. It's more like just fictional, because we're humans, we're limited. It's a very hard-on limit, almost mathematical, and we have a paper that came out this year about this that is named Why Oatmeal is Cheap. If you want to know more about this topic, you can look it up, like the theory behind why there's no free meal, basically. You have to spend energy to make things. But even in that case, I do think there's a way to offload some work. First, temporarily. If you make a system, you can do it in the preparation phase, not during the live performance. Meaning that you might be able to share the work more evenly across your timeline. But also, because making a system is different from doing something manually, you might be able to give this work to another type of worker. If you have a team with 3 writers and 1 engineer, you might be able to find a way to give a bit more work that could have gone to the writers to go to the engineer. There's still somebody working, but the workload might be able to be shared a bit more equitably. Saying this after Alina's talk, there's a lot of caveats to it, mainly that yes, we can automate some of the more menial tasks that people have to do while doing this live performance. But the act of automating this isn't neutral. There are choices being made, and it will not ultimately lead to a good outcome unless you carefully think about how you want to automate things, how you want to impact the other workers that are working with you. And my second goal is basically, I think these games are super interesting, and I think we could see more of them that are even more weird and interesting. Basically, by giving more mass, more energy into a system, they might be able to dance in different ways. And making smarter systems, we may be able to see even weirder shit. That's the goal. I want to see weirder shit in this world. Here's a screenshot from a live performance that was given about an hour ago with a system named Laika, where the authors interacted with the audience while writing what they call a manifesto. And they asked the audience to respond to prompts to decide the ones they liked. And some of the fun in that was being surprised by what the system was doing, being surprised by what people were suggesting, and playing around it. It was a very short performance, but very impactful. I put it in there. And some of other ways I think this could be interesting would be to put more energy into the system. I didn't choose the gravity or planet analogy for nothing. There's a thing with gravity where it's reciprocative. Like if you throw an apple, the Earth will attract the apple, but the apple will also attract the Earth in some ways. Meaning that if you change the system, you can also change the way people will interact with the system and the way developers will interact with it. You will change the whole dynamic. And empowering the system might have an impact on the tension between the two and might empower also the GMs and the players. In the same way, NASA launches a rocket around the Earth and uses its gravity to go further. That's one of the idea. One example, let me look at the time I have to see if I can speak about this example. Yeah, I do have time. One of the examples that we're working in is for Neurocracy itself, this game where you have seen before people would do like complex conspiracy board. They would use secondary tools to do this. So they would have to do a lot of manual things where we would have to open Miro or another brainstorming tool and copy and paste element of a game, have to think about how to create this space that is going to be shared with others. And I think in very simple ways we can empower both GMs and developers by making them a tool for these players that is not around Neurocracy, that is not secondary, but like is weaved into the game itself. For instance, the way we're developing this is like they go on Wikipedia articles and they could like a detective cutting snippets in a newspaper, being able to copy and paste it to a specific canvas that is made for that, where they will like be able to create their own conspiracy board like as an individual, but also the game would have systems that would be able to look at everybody's own individual knowledge map, knowledge graph, and combine it together into a big community scale knowledge map. The idea is that it could empower players to play as a community. Like if you're a neuroscientist and you're good in neuroscience, you can investigate the neuroscience aspect of Neurocracy. If you're good in arts, you can investigate the arts aspect of Neurocracy, but it's very hard for you to collaborate together. But if your knowledge graph and the knowledge graph of the other are matched together, it's easier to see connections between the two of you. Be like, oh, I didn't think that we could use neural implants to do this kind of art. I didn't think that if you create this kind of art, you would have this impact on the brain leading to these outcomes in the universe. That's an example. So that's a way to support the work of the players, but also can also support the work of the game developers who might have to spend less time going into forums to see what the players are thinking about. But also players don't always say what they're thinking about. This will be a tool. No, come back. No, yeah. Oopsie. This would be a tool to also have developers have better insights about what their community is doing, what they're thinking about, insight they couldn't really have before in this exact way. And in another way, this is also allowing the systems to have even more emergent things happening, like letting people connect things together that they couldn't easily connect before. This promises very weird surprises, very weird shit that I'm super happy to see in the future. I would love to go into more details about examples of how to do this, like more practically, more technically, but also examples of how not to do it, like very bad examples that go into very bad directions. We don't have that many times in front of me, so I'm going to direct you to a talk that we did with the Lies and Provisions Collective at GDC in 2022. So you can spend $600 a year to see it on VGC Vaults, or you can go to YouTube and see the retransmission that we've put there free of charge. It's very interesting. So we analyze video games that are very good use of AI and see how this interactive community games that don't do it well, and we learn from it to invite you to think about other type of games that could exist. And one of them is that the archaeologist in the room is Florence Smith-Nichols. It's also a bit about generative archaeology, which is like a fascinating way to think about interactive video games and where people can be surprised and surprise the game itself at the same time. That's it for me. Thank you so much for coming to this talk.
Thanks so much, Eunice. Oh, hello. Do we have any questions from the audience for Eunice? I think we've got one down here.
That's very intriguing. And I have a simple question about the conspiracy board part. So I'm doing this sort of research myself before, and at previous I was thinking whether it is possible to make AI in games to have, let's not to put in terms of deduction, since it's a little bit scary for AI. Let's just say reasonable guesses. Can AI produce reasonable guesses based on current known information and makes these guesses as a potential hint for the players in the game?
Did you write a paper about this? Did I read something where people wrote, basically made a system for a specific type of detective role-playing game, where the system would be able to know what the players have found as hints and be able to generate other hints to put in front of the players? Is that you? No. Okay, then you should check their work because it's very interesting. Yeah, I think, yeah, it's always interesting. It's some form of information, and as long as people are aware of where that information comes from and are not like obliged or pressured to use it, I think it could be interesting for game developers to have tools to understand their players, especially when they're doing things live, where they don't have the time to run full studies. It will be very helpful to have like statistics about, hey, okay, players are thinking about this, or they're doing this in the game, and so it might mean that the next focus we'll have for next week will be to go into that direction. And being aware of that sooner is interesting. Having suggestions on how to do it can be interesting too, like Leica. Leica could be an interesting tool for this kind of thing, like suggesting, hey, people are interested in this very minor NPC and has no background. Do we have like a suggestion of what this character can be? That could be interesting. It's a bit, in tabletop RPG games, we have random tables. People would use random tables when they don't have time to invent new dungeons, new characters. Sometimes they would just dice, randomly match up things and be like, okay, yeah, I can run with it. It's a prompt. It's a creative prompt. It's like, in this case, they are the person who executes the prompts, and the system gives them the prompt, which is different from the way you think about stable diffusion or other systems. And I think there's a lot to think about this thing, where having a systems giving you a prompt, a core prompt for you to build upon is interesting to me. Thank you for your question.
I think we might need to push on, unfortunately, but if we can thank our speaker one last time. Thank you so much, Eunice.